Real quick disclaimer before we start. Creating these videos is an ongoing process, and this one in particular was in development starting around late July. We've gotten some additional news about the game in the time since. Because of that, I'll be interrupting this video a few times to provide additional thoughts with said news in mind. Alright, with that out of the way, let's go! Still so hard to believe it's really happening, and yet Fire Emblem Warriors is just a short few months away. Not too long from now, you'll be able to take control of a wide range of heroes, take sword, axe, lance, tome, bow, or who knows what else in hand, and hack and slash your way through massive waves of enemies in spectacular fashion. But with such a game comes a lot of roster talk and speculation, and, well, the Fire Emblem fanbase is nothing if not divided over things, and this is no exception. Everyone has their own predictions for who will take to the battlefield at the game's release, so I figured, why not take a crack at it myself? Prepare yourself as we take a look into things and try to figure out what Fire Emblem Warriors' base roster will look like. Before we enter the fray, let's prepare for battle and lay some groundwork for what will go into each of these choices. First off, we've gotten word that this game's initial roster will be bigger than that of your typical Warriors spin-off. For reference, Hyrule Warriors had 13 playable characters at launch, though some of them had multiple weapons to choose from, giving us a total of 21 different available movesets. Considering we've also heard, at least I swear I remember hearing, that each character in this game will be sticking to one weapon type, we've reason to believe we'll see a larger base cast who has one moveset each. I tried to keep my prediction to about 25 characters total, but tried as I might, I couldn't trim it down far enough, so we'll be rolling with a roster of 30. Will the actual game's base roster be this big? Probably not. Probably closer to the mid-20s, but a little wishful thinking can't hurt, right? Second, something a little more contentious. We've heard that for the base release at least, they're going to be pulling characters mainly from Marth's 2 games, Awakening, and Fates. This has rubbed an awful lot of people the wrong way, and created this undercurrent of fans who feel like their favorite characters are getting shafted in favor of the flavors of the month. Honestly, I don't think it's that simple. If you remember, Hyrule Warriors did something similar, pulling most of its base roster from Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. They weren't willfully excluding other fan favorites like the Wind Waker or Majora's Mask, far from it in fact. They focused their scope at first on a specific few games in the series, then expanded that scope over time with post-release content and DLC. I fully expect something similar to happen here, so while some are foaming at the mouth about the apparent lack of Ike or Hector, I'm sure they'll make it eventually. But since we are talking about the base release for now, we're gonna abide by the rules the developers have said they're following. Ready everyone? Got your inventory sorted out? Everyone positioned where they want to be? Alright, let's begin. To start off, let's briefly touch on the original setting and characters created just for Warriors, the Kingdom of Aytolis and its twin royals, Rowan and Lyanna. Both have proven themselves competent sword fighters, and interestingly enough, both would rather the other inherited the throne. While they're admittedly on the bland side, that might just be because we haven't gotten to see their whole story yet, and even now they're harmless at worst. As far as other new characters go, I do think we'll get at least one more original character on the base roster. Maybe their former comrade and mentor Darius, maybe a villain, maybe the two are one and the same. It's hard to say for sure because there's a lot they haven't told us yet. Do I think there'll be more than one new bad guy? Yes, but I don't necessarily think they'll be unlockable at first. Hyrule Warriors only added Sia, Volga, and Wizrow through a free update after the game was already out, and I could see something similar here. Now let's move on to the major settings, and where better to begin than the beginning. The continent of Archanea was the site of the 2 wars surrounding the Hero King Marth, and their remakes. So far, Marth himself has been confirmed, and the Divine Dragon Tiki has an amiibo that basically confirms her as well. But who else could enter the fray from this bygone age? Well, first, none other than the person Marth holds dearest, Sita. The princess of the island nation of Talis, she bears a long history with Marth and fought alongside him all the way, eventually marrying him and ruling by his side. Famed for her pure heart and skill at fighting on the back of a Pegasus, she's also surprisingly strong-willed when it's called for, even willing to use her womanly charm to sway enemy soldiers into defecting to the good guys. In Fire Emblem Warriors, I see her fighting as a Pegasus Knight and wielding her signature wing spear. A flying unit isn't exactly common in Warriors games, but it does seem doable if they keep her at a low altitude and Fire Emblem has too many iconic flyers to just exclude them all. Little did I know one would actually get confirmed during production. As far as fighting style goes, I could see Sita employing a lot of motion and swooping maneuvers, using her incredible speed to rip apart enemy formations with a flurry of attacks. Up next is another warrior close to Marth who's seen his fair share of battles, Jagen. A long-standing veteran of the Altean Guard, he's learned a lot over the years and is more than willing to pass it on to Marth and any allies in need of it. Jagen's famous for being the first in a long line of units who start out powerful to help you through your first few fights, then fall off tremendously over time. He just feels too iconic to leave out. I could see Jagen filling a sort of similar role here, with higher base stats than the other characters but worse stat growth. Though he'd probably be more of an Oife here instead and still be at least decent in the long run. Other than that, he'd be fairly well balanced and notably durable against magic, befitting a paladin. And where Xander has his signature sword, Jagen would stand out with his focus on the lance. Next is yet another character with close ties to Marth, Merrick. A student of magic and bearer of the Wind Tome Excalibur. Yes, Fire Emblem used that name for a spellbook instead of a sword. He goes way back with the Hero King and particularly his elder sister. And with how quick he is to befriend people, is there any surprise? We've only had one magic user confirmed so far, but Merrick definitely fits the bill as a magic user I can see get in. Known for his prowess in wind magic, he'd be more specialized compared to Robin's multi-elemental generalist style. With Excalibur in hand, he'd fight by conjuring countless blades of wind to literally blow the enemy away. And now a complete 180 to someone a little more heavy-duty, Draug. The first armored knight of Fire Emblem, he takes his job of protecting his allies by drawing enemy fire very seriously. Beneath the armor though, he's quite the humble guy, brushing off his achievements instead of tooting his own horn. Draug has gone between several weapons as of late, a sword in Heroes, an axe in Tokyo Mirage Sessions, but here I think they'll give him his tried and true lance. Fulfilling the same tank role as always, Draug would be at his best holding the line and blocking choke points. Maybe he'd even have the ability to obstruct enemies from running past him, forcing them to deal with him personally. And now to 180 right back with another magic user, Linda. The daughter of a famous mage and a competent magic user herself, she joins Marth in his first conflict to avenge her father's death, then again in his second war a few years later. The inheritor of the light tome Aura, Linda is a force to be reckoned with when she gets going. I can already see a fighting style based around creating and controlling rings of light to smite her foes. Best take care not to let anyone get in on her though. She's a statistical portrait of a glass cannon. Axe users aren't all that common compared to most classes, but we just so happen to have a big name available here with Minerva. The princess of the kingdom of Macedon, she makes a bigger name for herself on the battlefield, though on the enemy's side at first due to extenuating circumstances. Maybe we'd see something similar happen here, with the heroes crossing their swords with her axe until she's able to join them? As a Draco Knight, she'd be our second flyer so far, with slower movement and attacks than Sita, but compensating by hitting much harder. Having the might of the legendary axe, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Hauteclair, will do that for you. I did hesitate on Minerva due to a certain other Wyvern rider who's been making the rounds lately, but she proved too popular and too important to pass up. Finally, I think we'll get at least one villain from each era, kinda like what Hyrule Warriors did with Girahim and Zant. For Archanea, I decided on the fell sorcerer, Garneth. A former student of magic and colleague of Linda's father, he was snubbed from inheriting the Aura Tome due to his apparent lack of empathy. One theft of a cursed artifact and subsequent corruption of his mind later, he managed to orchestrate nearly every act of evil to happen over the course of 2 games with the intent of reviving the Shadow Dragon Medeus and conquering the world. Garneth's big draw here is his signature magic, the Dark Tome, Imulu. Not only would its fell winds serve as an evil counterpart to Merrick's magic, it has an extra effect, protecting its wielder from nearly all forms of damage. It'd be toned down in Warriors for obvious reasons, but I could still see an interesting gimmick where his strongest attacks would give him temporary invincibility. But now, we leave Archanea and travel to its distant future. Fire Emblem Awakening, also known as the one that probably got many of you interested in Fire Emblem to begin with, brought the franchise back from the brink of hiatus and into the mainstream. While there's some divisive opinions about it in places, it does have some compelling character choices nonetheless. We've had several Awakening characters revealed already, Chrom from the very beginning, then Robin, Lissa, Frederick, and Lucina recently. but I think there might be a few more waiting in the fold. And among the most likely of its characters now is Tharja, a dark mage who defects from the armies of Plegia over what she views as a petty and pointless war. She's better known for other things. Liked in some circles for her body or her fanatical devotion to Robin, she's also disliked in other circles for taking both too far. Nonetheless, she is still a standout character, and her magic could help her play a unique role. Her stats are offensively geared similar to Linda's, but while the latter is all about firepower, Tharja's repertoire could be a bit more sinister. I could see stuff like using the Nosferatu tome she comes with in Awakening to drain her foe's health and replenish her own, or interpreting her Hex and Anathema skills into having ways to slow enemy movement. She might need the latter, seeing how her accuracy is pretty poor, and I could see the Warriors team interpreting that by giving her magic smaller hitboxes than usual. But let's move on from the creepy stalker lady and onto someone with a little more charisma, Gaius. A consummate thief who'd do almost anything for the right price, he found his way into the Shepherds after bailing out of a burglary because he learned it was actually an assassination plot. He's best known for his sharp wit and a massive addiction to sweets. Call it a hunch, but I think they'll divert Gaius from the swords he used in Awakening to the throwing knives they have him use in Fire Emblem Heroes. It seems like that weapon type is here to stay, and they give the thief class and its promotions a unique role as saboteurs of sort through debuffing the stats of enemies they hit. Due to that, Gaius wouldn't be quite as skilled at mowing down waves of enemies, but he would excel at weakening wide swaths of them for his allies to finish off. He'd be at his best fighting alongside someone, especially when paired up. We got another popular one next, the gifted yet tragic Cordelia. Considered a paragon of Elise's Pegasus Knights, her talents are many, and yet she's racked by survivor's guilt, an inferiority complex, and the fact that the object of her affection just doesn't feel the same way. And, well, she just felt too popular to pass up, since the dev team does seem to be factoring popularity in. I was still on the fence for a while though, because there needed to be some way that'd make her stand out next to Sita. Well, I think I found a way. They could give Cordelia some elements of Awakening's Darkflyer class. By mixing some low-level magic into her stronger attacks, and maybe even working in the Gamebreaker Gale Force that lets the bearer act twice per turn, there's enough stuff to make her feel unique. Kind of funny how things can pan out, isn't it? Cordelia was, in fact, confirmed late in this video's development. Guess I was onto something, huh? We have one more Awakening character to cover. The obligatory bad guy, the Mad King, Gangrel. The driving force behind Awakening's first arc, he appears at first to be a sadistic ruler who wages war and deceives other nations for his own amusement. But a look under the surface later on reveals a tragic figure drunk with power who endured a brutal past and now bears a chip on his shoulder and a desire to take it out on the world. Gotta admit, this choice was a bit iffy. His biggest draw here is being another thief character, specifically of the Trickster class, which also makes him a staff wielder who'd be able to heal his allies just like Lissa. I'm also kinda torn on his weapon of choice. Do they give him daggers like the thief characters as of late? Do they give him his Levin sword despite Robin already using it for his finishers? Or do they create a hybrid Levin knife of some sort for him? I don't know. And now, onto the controversial one. Fire Emblem Fates has a lot of mixed opinions. The game's 3 paths have widely discussed issues ranging from shaky storytelling to poorly characterized protagonists to many maps that are either bland or reliant on gimmicks to Revelations feeling like a rushed mess in general. A lot of people are mad about Fates getting so much attention in Fire Emblem Warriors, but I still think there are some interesting characters to be had despite the game's flaws. We've seen Corrin, Ryoma, and Xander so far, and I believe there are a few others worth considering. Doesn't hurt that there are some obvious picks here, with the first being the Lady of the Lake, Azura. A focal point of all 3 paths, Azura is a Norian princess taken and raised in Hoshido who bears a mysterious past even beyond that, and seems to know much more about the course of events than she lets on. More importantly here though, she's a capable fighter. As a combat songstress who wields a lance in battle, Azura can use her voice to invigorate her allies. While she can't use it to let them take another turn since combat doesn't work that way in Warriors, I could see her being capable of buffing her allies. And maybe her strongest attacks would even involve controlling water, at the cost of some of her health. On to another guy you just know is in, Takumi. The younger prince of Hoshido has an abrasive personality and a competitive edge that mask insecurities and a deep lack of trust. all of which play out very differently in each story path. He's a complex character, and a bit tragic too. But in battle, Takumi is a force to behold, wielder of the divine Fujin Yumi, a sacred weapon that lets him create and fire arrows of pure wind and cross the harshest of terrains completely unimpeded, even water. We've seen bow-based movesets in Warriors games before, and so he'd be the perfect character to combine that with his own unique traits. But there's another shoo-in from the other kingdom. Flying in from Nor is Camilla. This elder princess of the Kingdom of Dusk is a bit mentally unstable from the trauma of a bloody feud she was caught in as a child, but she still manages to be fiercely protective of her siblings. Violently protective. Though she's better known for the highly mixed opinions surrounding her figure and her obsessive devotion toward Corrin. That sounds familiar. As arguably the most prominent axe user of modern Fire Emblem, she's the reason I hesitated on Minerva. But I do think there's room enough for two flyers with axes, and Camilla can stand out by making the most of her signature Malignite class. After all, Minerva can't mix up her axe swings with occasional magic in her finishers, can she? Controversies aside, I think this Lady of War and her two sisters is pretty likely, for better or worse. But she's not the only Norian who can make waves as a newcomer, as evidenced by Leo. The younger Prince of Nor and Takumi's counterpart, Leo's best known for his keen mind and strategic wit. His cold and calculating demeanor may put people off at first, but under it all, he does genuinely care about his family. Leo's biggest assets here are his nature as a dark knight, a mage on horseback, which isn't common, and his signature tome, Brynhildr, which lets him manipulate the earth and summon plants. There's some cool ideas worth looking into here. Maybe damage over time effects from long-lasting trees, balanced by his attacks being on the slow side to reference his rather lackluster speed stat. We're almost done with Fates, but I did want to get another healer in somehow, and so I ended up choosing Sakura. As the youngest of the Hoshiden royals, she looks up to her elder siblings greatly, Corrin included, well on two of the paths, and her shy and timid demeanor belies a strong will and a desire to keep her loved ones safe. Admittedly not my strongest pick, but my instincts tell me Lissa wouldn't be the only healer to get in. Much like the former pulled from her promoted War Cleric class and picked up an axe, I think Sakura would fight with a bow like she does as a promoted priestess. She'd complement this with the healing powers of Hoshiden's ceremonial rods, using them to heal allies in a larger area than other staff users, but for not as much health. Don't let that discourage you though, because she'd be one hell of a fighter with the magic-powered shining bow in hand. And to top it off, let's add one more villain. And this one was easy to pick out. Garen. The ruthless tyrant king of Nor is behind much of the strife and fates, invading neighboring nations and even kidnapping a young Corrin from Hoshido to serve his own agenda. Yet the records, and his children, say he was once a loving and devoted father who grew heartless after the bloody feud between his many concubines. It's as if he's an empty shell of his former self. In addition to being a big-name bad guy, Garen's also an axe wielder who's more or less armored. Carrying the wicked bulwark in the battle, he's sure to bring a blight to his foes. There are also a couple ways it could take his special attacks, but spoilers. And there you have it. A base roster 30 strong with a wide array of weapons and playstyles. As you can see, there's a lot here to be interested in despite the limited scope they're giving the game at the beginning. I ended up making a lot of tough choices. Let me tell you, having everyone from Fates only be the Royals didn't sit the best with me. And there's quite the list of characters who didn't miss out by much. I could still see any of them getting in fairly plausibly, and so our honorable mentions are Ogma, Barst, George, Navarre, Katarina, Hardin, Lonku, Donald, Virion, Aversa, Elise, Kaze, Felicia, Aboro, and the Shapeshifters. Like I said, it wasn't easy. Far as DLC or any post-release content goes, I feel very confident that it'll happen. We saw extensive DLC for Hyrule Warriors in its 3DS port, and I think it's a pretty safe bet that we'll get the same here. Actually, I'm going to call it now. Alm and Celica will be the first DLC characters. Shadows of Valentia was probably too late to factor into the base game, and both of them are relevant and pretty damn popular. Beyond that, the dev team has a lot to gain from setting up specialty packs featuring characters from, say, the Game Boy Advance games, or from Tellius. And oh boy, do they have a lot of good ones to choose from there. Or who knows, if they're still doing stuff in a year's time, maybe a few characters from the new game set to be released next year. Or perhaps even a curveball. Hey, bigger surprises have happened, right? Like this game even existing. Hope you enjoyed this little bit of speculation. I put a lot of thought into this roster, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just one big educated guess. I don't expect to get it all right, and I'm interested to see just how far off the mark I end up. However it goes though, I hope the community can approach this game with cautious optimism. I know it stings when it feels like your favorites are getting left out in the cold. Trust me, I definitely know. But it really does look like all hope is not lost. And hey, Fire Emblem Warriors still looks like a blast to play even despite the divisive roster decisions. So let's not bench it just because it got a few bad level ups, know what I mean? Its growth rates are still good. If you're interested in more content like this, my channel's got quite a bit of it and it's always growing. If you're a Smash Brothers fan, check out my main series where I make character concepts for potential future newcomers. And if you want to help make more content happen more often, I'd appreciate any support you can give me through Patreon. Until then, take care out there. After all, when things go wrong in real life, we can't just reset the chapter.